Well, we got tons to get to on this Thursday morning with Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. We will get to the conversation that was had in the Chicago City Council about a $51 million bill that they passed to fund migrants in the city of Chicago. And some of the debates heated up, really pitted several groups against each other in the city of Chicago. So we'll get to that eventually. But I wanted to touch on this story first. It's a national story about the president's son, Hunter Biden, and deals with firearms and a recent court case surrounding the issue of whether or not nonviolent users of cannabis have a Second Amendment right. And we all know that, of course, Hunter Biden's facing all kinds of questions, even the president himself facing some questions as to, the allegations House Republicans are digging up concerning foreign dollars coming from foreign countries and foreign companies into the president's inner circle, his son and other family members, and questions of whether or not that's pay to play and some kind of influence peddling. So those questions still remain. But there's also this issue of Hunter Biden, who is seen in pictures and video using illicit drugs like crack cocaine, and also the story of him having a firearm that he apparently disposed of in a trash can somewhere, and Secret Service were allegedly involved and raised questions as to did he lie on a federal form to get the firearm that he was not a user of drugs. So that, of course, is something that's been out for years now, and people have speculated that since Hunter Biden is the son of the president, he's getting away with quite a bit. Well, apparently, you've got some interesting headlines here that are being shared by the Firearms Policy Council, which, if you're not familiar with them, you should probably check that out, because they've got the slew of lawsuits across the country dealing with challenges against laws they say violate individuals' Second Amendment rights to keep and bear arms, and how that shall not be infringed. They've got lawsuits all across the country dealing on a variety of different types of laws that do infringe, according to the FPC, of individuals' Second Amendment rights. But they're also pretty active on social media, and they've been encouraging people to sign up and be members of FPC, because they also have the case that challenged the ATF's pistol brace ban, the rule that the ATF crafted, and there's currently an injunction in place that FPC was able to get, but it's only for FPC members. So they've been doing a membership drive trying to get people to recognize the work that they do, and having them register and sign up with FPC. So that's an option for you if you want to register and get that done. But on Twitter, they've shared a couple of stories recently on the issue of nonviolent users of cannabis and whether or not they should have the Second Amendment. So here's a tweet they put out. Peaceable users of marijuana have just as much of a right or armed self-defense as anyone else. You're an embarrassment. Delete your agency. And that was in response to an ATF post that the ATF out of St. Paul, Minnesota posted. And what they posted was, regardless of recent changes in Minnesota law relating to marijuana, an individual who's a current user of marijuana is prohibited from shipping, transporting, receiving, or possessing firearms or ammunition. Read the details. You click through, and you could see the news release they put out talking about the Federal Gun Control Act of '68, prohibits any person who is an unlawful user or addicted to any controlled substance as defined by the Controlled Substances Act of 1970 from shipping, transporting, receiving, or possessing firearms and ammunition. They say, and this is according to Minnesota law, the recent law that legalized marijuana, an individual who's a current user of marijuana is still federally defined as an unlawful user of a controlled substance, and therefore is prohibited from shipping, transporting, receiving, or possessing firearms and ammunition. Illinois has, recreational cannabis as well, and there's states all across the country that have medicinal cannabis. And I know when Illinois first brought on the medicinal cannabis, I had veterans reaching out saying that they used cannabis for PTSD, and they were worried that they would somehow get snared up in all of this. But really, I think the sense of the federal government is that unless cannabis is legalized recreationally, across the country on a federal law, then it's going to be this case where they say that users of cannabis don't have access to firearms. So how does all of that work into Hunter Biden and him on video using crack cocaine and the questions of should he have been able to get a firearm? Firearms Policy Council Coalition also sharing this tweet linking to an article that Hunter Biden is apparently using a precedent of the U.S. Supreme Court to somehow defend against the idea of going after the president's son. So here's the Firearms Policy Coalition again with their statement on a New York Times piece. A president's son is invoking a court decision his father has described as an affront to common sense in the Constitution and staking that claim on a majority opinion written by Justice Thomas. So if you go over to the New York Times article, you can read this. And Hunter Biden's legal team's invoking a Supreme Court decision his father denounced. And you go further to Hunter Biden's father. The Supreme Court decision last June that expanded Second Amendment rights is a travesty for gun control, but Hunter Biden's lawyer, it's been an opening. In the months after the court's landmark ruling that gave people a broad right to carry guns outside the home, Mr. Biden's lawyers told the Justice Department prosecutors who were investigating whether to charge him in connection with a gun purchase that a prosecution of him would likely be ruled moot, according to two people briefed on the matter. While it's not uncommon for defense lawyers to point to shifting precedents to starve off prosecution, the circumstances of this argument, like so many elements of the Hunter Biden saga, are striking. The president's son is involved in a court decision his father has described as an affront to common sense and staking the claim on a majority opinion written by Justice Clarence Thomas. So if you recall, there was also a case throughout the country that had an appeals court essentially say that an individual who was caught in the commission of a crime with a firearm, unsavory circumstance altogether, but he also apparently had cannabis with him. And he challenged the gun law that ultimately he was charged with, and an appeals court actually said, no, nonviolent users of cannabis are not prohibited from the Second Amendment, pointing to that U.S. Supreme Court ruling of the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, essentially saying that, everybody has a right, and it's a supercharged right, the Second Amendment, and you can't prohibit people from having it unless they fall into categories of being a convicted felon or mentally unstable and so on. So interesting to see this development with the president's son apparently invoking the Bruin decision to somehow get around the allegations that he violated federal law by lying on a form as a crack cocaine user that was getting a gun. So just fascinating. Wanted to share that little bit with you. And again, if you aren't familiar with the Firearms Policy Coalition, go check them out. Their gun policy on Twitter. And you can stay up to date because, again, they have just tons of lawsuits all across the country dealing with challenges to firearm laws. It is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY. Springfield's News and Talk. Stay tuned. We'll get to another little tidbit about the president and questions that were raised concerning whether or not he's corrupt and the reaction from the White House to that question. So stay tuned. We'll touch on that next. We were talking about Hunter Biden, and his father is apparently probably perplexed with the position that his attorneys are taking, according to the New York Times, because Hunter Biden is using Supreme Court precedents on gun rights to, I guess, challenge a question of whether or not he violated the law by having a crack cocaine addiction at one point while being in possession of a firearm, which is against federal law. So if you get a chance, be sure to check out that story. It's rather fascinating. But, the Bidens have a whole host of other problems that they got to contend with, including questions of corruption. And it's been a bit since, somebody in the White House press corps actually asked about investigations into the Bidens, and in particular, the questions of what kinds of funds have the Bidens accepted from foreign companies and foreign countries like oligarchs in Russia or companies controlled by the Chinese government? Because there's a lot of speculation out there and apparently a lot of documentation that the House Republican Oversight Committee is working to get. And it's all around the Hunter Biden laptop and questions about did the FBI cover up the Hunter Biden laptop before the 2020 election. Indication is that, yes, they did, but they're trying to get to the bottom of it. They're looking at possibly holding the FBI director in contempt for not turning over information. So House Republicans in Congress really active in getting those things to see the light of day. But the questions really come down to, is the Biden family corrupt? And that was a question posed yesterday in the White House press corps by a reporter asking the president's spokesman, John Kirby, and also Karine Jean-Pierre. You can hear her off of the microphone a bit. But this is how that went. It's just a short little 40-second clip of a question about whether or not the president is corrupt.
53% of the public, including a fourth of Democrats, believe, quote, Joe Biden was involved with his son in an illegal influence peddling scheme. There's, of course, evidence that the president interacted with his relatives, associates from China, Mexico, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Ukraine. So what do you say to the majority of Americans who believe that the president is himself corrupt?
Wow. Can I take that question?
The president has spoken to this. The president has spoken to this. And there's nothing to these claims.
So nothing to these claims. The president has spoken to this. John Kirby goes, wow. And Karine Jean-Pierre says, Jesus. Let's hear it again.
Influence peddling scheme. There's, of course, evidence that the president interacted with his relatives, associates from China, Mexico, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Ukraine. So what do you say to the majority of Americans who believe that the president is himself corrupt?
Wow. Can I take that question?
The president has spoken to this. The president has spoken to this. And there's nothing to these claims.
And I think the president has simply said that those aren't true, and he doesn't know anything about his son's business dealings. Well, I guess we'll just wait for whatever the FBI turns over if they're not found in contempt by Congress, the proper oversight body to look into these types of things and to provide that check and balance of the executive. So just fascinating to hear that, and wanted to share that with you just because, we were talking about Hunter Biden earlier, so why not?